Hi, you're watching DNA Today, a multi-award-winning genetics podcast where we explore everything to do with genetics, from CRISPR to rare diseases to new research. We have won the Science and Medicine Podcast Award for many years now. We have hundreds of episodes, and we really hope you enjoy these conversations where we dive into so many genetic concepts. I'm Kira Deneen, a certified genetic counselor, and your host.
We are at Team Telomere's in-person, obviously, Cocktails and Chromosome event. And for those that saw on LinkedIn, that screams me because my background is in cytogenetics. So just obviously had to come here. And I have had on people from Team Telomere before on the show, all the way back. I think it was episode 93 back in 2018. So we had Katie Stevens and some other doctors on. But today I am delighted to be joined by Jena Robertson, program administrator at Team Telomere, but more importantly, mom to Rori, which we're going to talk about today. And we have Will Mannherz here, PhD, MD, Harvard medical student. And we're going to talk about how your stories intertwine. But I want to start by learning about Rori. So at this event, Cocktails and Chromosomes, we're here to learn about telomere biology disorders. And your daughter, Rori, was diagnosed with this condition. And so we've been able to hear from many people, including yourself, speaking here tonight. And Katie Stevens, that I mentioned, talked about her son, Riley. And that's what she focused on in that episode that I mentioned. But before we get into the experiences medically, just tell us about Rori. What does she love? What lights her up? Tell us about Rori.
Rori is a sassy 4-year-old.
Okay.
She loves pink Barbies, and she gets a kick out of the word moose.
Moose.
Yes.
She loves moose.
Loves the word moose. Yep. It is the funniest word in the dictionary, too.
So if she's ever in a bad mood, do you just look at her and take a moment and go, moose?
I just go, moose. And she just starts cracking up. So that,
oh my gosh, I love that.
She's just a fun little kid.
Yeah, and we saw a beautiful video with you, and Dr. Agarwal was featured in it as well.
Yes.
And I saw she was wearing pink pajamas, so I can see that's already a theme, exactly. So when did telomere biology disorders come across your radar? How old was Rori when you first learned about this condition, and that either you had a diagnosis for her or it was a differential diagnosis at the time?
Yeah, so Rori was symptomatic starting roughly around 9 months, but we did not receive a diagnosis until she was 18 months old. Yeah, so it took a very long time for us to really get a true diagnosis, and we actually had 4 different diagnoses prior to that.
Okay, and unfortunately that's really common for people with rare diseases, that they often get multiple misdiagnoses before they finally find an accurate one. So for those that don't know, I think it'd be helpful to provide a little bit of a background on telomere biology disorders. Will, did you want to take a stab at kind of explaining what this disorder is and how it can maybe start presenting, and we can see how much that's accurate in terms of Rori's experience?
Absolutely.
Sure. So these are spectrum of disorders. They're inherited, and they happen when you have inherited defects in the genes that maintain telomeres. So these repeats that are on the ends of our chromosomes, they normally shorten with age. But in these patients, they have prematurely short telomeres, and so end up getting a variety of kind of premature aging type syndromes. This can range from, in adults, pulmonary fibrosis, which is the most common actually telomere biology disorder, ranging to kids who present with bone marrow failure, immunodeficiency, and a spectrum of things in between as well.
Yeah, seems like spectrum is a really important term here, because you can have people diagnosed in adulthood where they were relatively healthy up till that point.
Correct.
And others like Rori that were more severely symptomatic very early in life.
Yes.
So what led to the decision to have a bone marrow transplant for Rori?
Yeah, Rori was transfusion dependent, meaning she needed platelets and red blood cells at one point on a biweekly basis. So that's a very frequent transfusion piece that kind of pushed us further into what do we do next, because you can only do that for so long. And it was really down to, do we try something that may not work and we can't have a transplant afterwards, or do we just do it and hope for the best. And at that time, a protocol had already been 10 years in play. And so we really trusted the science behind it and felt very comfortable with moving forward with something that has now truly given her a second, chance at life.
Yeah, we saw in this amazing video, which we'll link to in the show notes, that you're featured in it and interviewed throughout it, and that you were explaining that Riley just kind of really became herself afterwards. You could see her personality more, and just she had more energy.
Yeah.
So what was she like after she recovered? I presume it takes a little bit to really...
Yeah, actually we were one of the fastest families to come out of transplant. And usually they kind of give you this like rough time of, 30 to 45 days typically before you come out. And I think about day 17, Rori was doing very, very well, which was actually when we first started to see her start to take bites and have more energy and feel really, really solid. Not to say that there weren't tons of hiccups and points that put us back into the hospital, but really she came out of transplant a completely different kiddo, taking less naps, sleeping less, having a much better attitude towards playing, wanting to go to the beach and swim and do all the things that you would want your child to do. And it was just a wonderful transition of like going in so poorly and coming out essentially like it really was a second life for her, a second shot in a rebirth day. And we just love who she's become since then.
Yeah, because in that video, people will see she's about 2 years old and she's 4 now.
4.5.
Yeah.
And a lot has changed in those 2 years. And we're just super grateful that we've had the opportunity to be in that, safe transplant scenario and learn more as we get further into her journey.
With a bone marrow transplant, what I hear from other disorders is that it is helping to ease some symptoms. So is that what the experience has been? Because it's not a cure for this condition.
Yeah. So yes and no. The blood has essentially been rejuvenated, so it's somebody else's marrow, so she does very well in that sense. She doesn't need transfusions. Her platelets look beautiful. So those things like going to the park and falling is no longer a big concern. In transplant territory, if a child falls and has low platelets, you're looking at an emergency situation. We go to the park now, she can fall and I don't have to say, let me get you to a hospital in 5 minutes. So things like that have changed. What hasn't changed are the other things in her body that continue to progress. Her eyesight, because it impacts all your major organs and your eyes, your skin. So all those things continue to progress in a way that we wouldn't want it to. But overall, right now, Rori's condition is more stable than not, and we will take that.
Yes. You mentioned telomeres. Obviously, it's in the name of the umbrella of telomere biology disorders. Can you remind people what the condition is within that she's diagnosed with?
Yeah, so she has Dyskeratosis Congenita, and specifically she has a TNF2 mutation in Revesz syndrome, which is a very, very severe form of that, which means she has more severity, but also much younger diagnosis, much younger symptoms, and her expectancy of progression is much quicker than some of the other mutations.
And Will, coming from your expertise, in terms of these being telomere biology disorders, we're focused on, as you really nicely explained, of like the end part of a chromosome that really protects it. And so we want telomeres to be relatively long, because if they're short, people can have symptoms like Rori does. So how much do we understand more than that, I guess? As we talked about, it's like a multi-organ, because we've got telomeres on all of our chromosomes, and our chromosomes are in all of our cells all over our body. So what else is helpful for people to understand about telomeres and maybe how it relates to this disorder?
I think a couple things come to mind. One of which is really important is that for a lot of these disorders, it's genetic and you can inherit a mutation from your parent. And in doing so, you also inherit the short telomeres that they have. So you get a phenomenon called anticipation, where you have progression of the disease generation after generation, and people can present with symptoms earlier in life, have more severe presentations. So that's one aspect of the disease.
So similar to Huntington sometimes, where you have generations have more repeats, so the anticipation concept is the same, if people are familiar with that.
Yeah, there's some I don't know how much into the science of it you want to get, but,
Give it a shot. Yes, educate me, Will.
you know, there's some studies even where, say you have a mutation that has a smaller effect on maintaining telomere length, it may take as long as 10 generations for that to manifest with diseases. And there's been some studies of pedigrees where they trace back to a founder mutation that happened hundreds of years ago.
Oh, wow.
And are only now leading to their descendants having problems. So it can really be something that shows up in a family. And tying this back to the clinical training that I've had, when you have someone who's presenting with, you know, you're concerned for a telomere disorder, it's important to also ask about their family history. Yes. Do they have a parent who had bone marrow problems, or do they have any siblings or children? And really trying to flesh out the full picture of where they're coming from in their family can be important too.
Family history is so important. I'm a genetic counselor, so every day that I see patients, I'm taking many family histories. So yeah, certainly want to echo how that's important. And it's great to hear how it can be important with different disorders. You've worked with Dr. Agarwal in his lab. So tell me a little bit about this really exciting research that you've been a part of, because this is new since we did our episode about telomere biology disorders 6-7 years ago. So I'm learning that thymidine is really promising. I think you were the one actually in the video with the computer of showing, yes, now I'm remembering this. So what is this connection with thymidine and telomeres? What have we learned so far, at least in the lab?
So when I started my PhD with Dr. Agarwal, our goal was to really try to learn more about telomere length control biology and try to find new approaches for a systemic therapy to treat this systemic disease that goes beyond just bone marrow failure. And so to do that, I did the first genome-wide screen for telomere length regulating genes in human cells. So we came into this with really no preconceived notions about which genes would be important for telomere length control. We did a genome-wide screen, which has been used before in other applications. We were the first to apply it to figure out how telomere length is controlled. We used the screen, infected cells, and then sorted them based on their telomere length. And it showed us that loss of genes that are important for thymidine synthesis led to short telomeres, and loss of genes that degrade DNTPs, like the final precursors that are used for DNA synthesis, led to long telomeres, suggesting that the amount of thymidine in particular would be important for telomere length control. But the real key experiment was supplementing cells with nucleosides, the precursors of DNTPs. And we found that when we supplemented cells with thymidine, the telomere length got longer by thousands of base pairs.
Thousands?
Within weeks. It's
amazing.
Really one of the most remarkable effects, to the point where when I showed it to Dr. Agarwal, my PhD advisor, he was kind of like, this is too good to be true.
Right, like something is like off.
Going on, but
wow.
You know, it's been a very robust effect. And then after that discovery, what we've done is try to flesh out how is this actually working? What's the mechanism behind this? The finding still shows that thymidine seems to be critically important. And one really interesting piece of this that's been kind of complementary to our work in the lab has been the human genetics, including genome-wide association studies that have linked nucleotide metabolism genes with telomere length. And then actually in a cohort of patients with Dyskeratosis Congenita, they found several families that had mutations in thymidylate synthase. So the rate-limiting thymidine synthesis gene, loss of that gene was leading to
it being shorter and then the symptoms.
Yeah.
Wow,
So
this is a remarkable. So has this research been published yet?
Yeah, so we published
Amazing.
our findings in 2023, and then we've published a follow-up one where we kind of flesh out more of the broader mechanism for how we think this is working in this year. And then the paper describing the thymidylate synthase families came out in 2022. And the genome-wide association studies have been between 2020 and now. There have been a number of studies that have come out.
Amazing. We'll put all of those links in the show notes. Usually, because we just met a couple hours ago, I have not read those papers yet. Usually I do my research. But hey, I met you and I said, hey, let's do this recording. So what's even more exciting with this is what we're going to do with it. So the clinical trial starts this fall. Would Rori be eligible for this, even though she's had the bone marrow transplant, to help treat other aspects? Or is this really for other people?
Yeah, so this trial right now is in phase 1, which is really just safety. So there really aren't exclusions outside of what their parameters are for the trial itself. And although I can't say Rori will be accepted or be eligible from what we understand and what their guidelines are at this point per approval, yes, she would be able to participate in this trial, and yes, she would be able to take the drug.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll have to see how everything plays out, but how exciting that is.
We're very excited.
Wow, that is just remarkable. And in order for this to happen, money has to be involved, right?
Yes.
And that's the reason we're all here tonight.
Correct.
Is to support Team Telomere. And from what I remember of what we were talking about at the event around the corner is that Team Telomere has raised $1 million so that this clinical trial happen. A lot of that money is going towards the clinical trial. Yeah.
That is so families can, there's not very many slots for this trial, and the families that do are from all over the place, essentially, is the understanding. And so for our families to be able to participate, we have to travel, we have to lodge, we have to get to the hospital and pay for things that, insurance is not. And so
they're not going to pay for ride shares, hotels.
Exactly. And, how do you get the data, and how do you continue research without the families to participate? And
you can't.
That is why we need to find the money and fund it and push everything forward.
Yeah, and this has been an incredible event. If people saw posts on social media I've been making, the silent auction, I walked in, I was like, oh my gosh, there is a signed Taylor Swift framed photo. Yes. I was like, wow, this is not a, throw it together kind of event.
No.
This is a really high caliber event that I believe there was over 170 people here. Just amazing. Yeah. But we're also going to put a link in so that people can support kids and people with telomere biology disorders like Rori to be able to support all of this research and to help people that have these disorders so they can be laughing at the word moose all the time.
Yes,
so yes, I think, we need to be, keep supporting this. And I think just educating people is a big part of that. So thank you both for taking time during the event. So I think we should head back to that. But thank you everybody for learning and listening along with us. And Will and Jena, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for watching DNA Today. To access all of our episodes, head over to dnatoday.com. We also have a lot of bonus content on there that you can enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, guest pitches, you name it, send them in to info@dnatoday.com. We'd also really appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more nerds like yourself find the show. Also, if you like giveaways and other ways to connect with us, I recommend following us on social. We're at DNA Today Podcast. We also have a Patreon if you want to be the most level involved in the show. That's also at DNA Today Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Join us next time to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.